As the oldest, you should pay. The words hung in the air between us, delivered with such casual cruelty by my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, that for a moment I couldn't respond. I sat frozen at my kitchen table, the tea growing cold in my trembling. Hands! It's only fair, Margaret, she continued, her manicured nails tapping impatiently on my cherished oak table, the last piece of furniture from my marriage with Richard. You've had your life. Now it's time to support James and me. The kids need college funds, and our mortgage is killing us. I'd spent the last 15 years as my late husband's caregiver, 15 years watching Alzheimer's slowly erase the man I loved, wiping away our memories together one by one. 15 years of doctor's appointments, medications, and eventually, adult diapers and feeding tubes. 15 years during which my son James and his wife rarely visited, always too busy. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. With their lives in the suburbs. Vanessa, I don't have that kind of money, I said quietly. The medical bills took almost everything. My pension barely covers my own expenses. Her perfectly lined lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But you have this house. And your investment account. James told me about it. The investment account. The small nest egg I'd managed to protect through Richard's illness. The only thing standing between me and destitution in my final years. That's for my care if I get sick. You know I can't or won't, she interrupted, standing up. James, and I have given you options. We could sell this house, put you in that nice retirement community, and use the rest for the family. Or you could just help us now. She gathered her designer purse. Think about it, Margaret. Family helps family. After she left, I sat alone, my hands still trembling. At 68, where would I go if I lost my home? What would I do? The silence of my empty house pressed in around me. The next morning brought more than just aches in my joints. It brought Robert, my financial advisor of 20 years, calling with an urgent matter he refused to discuss over the phone. The ride to his office was a blur. His face when I arrived told me everything before he spoke a word. Margaret, he said, his voice heavy as he slid a folder across his desk. Someone has taken out a substantial loan in your name. $1 million secured against your house and investment account. The room swam before my eyes. That's impossible. The signatures look like yours, Robert said gently. But I know you wouldn't do this without consulting me first. That's why I flagged it. With shaking hands, I opened the folder. There it was, loan documents bearing what looked like my signature, but with subtle differences only someone who knew my handwriting would notice. When was this done? I whispered. 3 weeks ago, Robert replied. The money was transferred to an account jointly held by James and Vanessa Harrington. My son, my only child. The boy I'd raised alone after his father's early onset diagnosis. The child I'd worked 3 jobs to put through college. I didn't cry. The betrayal ran too deep for tears. What happens now? I asked, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. Robert's face was grave. If the payments aren't made, you'll lose everything, Margaret. The house, your retirement funds, everything. I nodded, rising slowly to my feet. Thank you for telling me, Robert. Margaret, we need to call the police. This is fraud. No, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. Not yet. As I drove home, memories flooded back. James as a little boy, running into my arms after school. James at his high school graduation, so proud in his cap and gown. James meeting Vanessa in college, his eyes lighting up whenever she entered. A room. When had my son become this person? When had I become nothing more than a bank account to them? I pulled into my driveway and sat there, engine off, staring at the house where I'd spent 43 years of my life. The house where I'd nursed my husband through his long goodbye. The house I might now lose because my own flesh and blood had betrayed me. My phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Dinner Sunday. We need your answer. I didn't respond. For the first time in my life, I felt a cold resolve replacing the hurt. They thought they knew me. Predictable. Accommodating Margaret, who always put family first. They thought they could take everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed to preserve. They had no idea who I really was, but they were about to find out. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept returning to those loan documents, with my forged signature. I got up and walked through my darkened house, touching familiar surfaces, remembering. This corner of the living room where Richard's hospital bed had stood during his final years. The kitchen where I'd pured his food when he could no longer chew. The garden I'd neglected because there weren't enough hours in the day to both care for it and for him. My life had been a series of sacrifices, beginning long before Richard's illness. I was only 24 when the first symptoms appeared. Subtle at first. Richard forgetting where he parked the car, missing appointments, struggling to find words. The diagnosis came 2 years later, early onset Alzheimer's. James was just 7. We should put you in a home, my mother had suggested when Richard could no longer work. Think about James, think about yourself, but I couldn't do it. The vows I'd made meant something to me. In sickness and in health, I took on extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse. When that wasn't enough, I added weekend shifts at a local clinic. When Richard needed full-time care, I started doing night shifts so I could be with him during the day. Sleep became a luxury. Vacations, non-existent. Friends drifted away because I never had time to see them. My world shrank to our house, my workplaces, and the endless cycle of caregiving. James grew up in the shadow of his father's illness. I tried to give him a normal childhood, attended his baseball games when I could, helped with homework between medications and diaper changes, but I know he resented the attention his father required. "Why can't we be like other families?" he'd ask. "Why can't we go on vacation? Why do you always look so tired?" When he left for college, a state school I'd scraped and saved to afford, he seemed relieved to escape. His visits home grew increasingly rare. He met Vanessa his sophomore year, and from then on he had a new family. I didn't begrudge him that. I was grateful he'd found someone. I just never imagined that their happiness would come at the expense of my security. I found myself in James's old bedroom, untouched since he'd left for college. The baseball trophies still lined the shelf, the posters of bands long since broken. Up still hung on the walls. I opened his closet and breathed in the faint, lingering scent of the boy he had been. Where had I gone wrong? When had my son decided that his mother was nothing more than a resource to be depleted? My gaze fell on a photo on his bedside table. James at his college graduation, his arm around me. We were both smiling, but I noticed now what I hadn't seen. Then, how he was already turning away from me, leaning toward the future where Vanessa waited just outside the frame. I picked up the photo, studying my own face. I looked exhausted even then. Gray already threaded through my hair, lines etched around my eyes from years of disrupted sleep and constant worry. I barely recognized that woman now. The next morning, I called my neighbor, Helen, who'd been a paralegal for 40 years before retiring. "Helen," I said when she answered, "I need your advice about something legal." 2 hours later, we sat at her kitchen table, the loan documents spread between us. "This is serious, Margaret," she said, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "This is fraud. Your son and his wife could go to prison." The word made my heart clench. "I don't want that. I just want my security back." Helen peered at me over her glasses. "Then what do you want?" It was the question I'd been asking myself all night. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? My son back? "I want them to understand what they've done," I said finally. "I want them to face consequences, but not public ones. And I want my money protected." Helen nodded slowly. "Then you need leverage, Margaret. And you need to be smarter than they think you are." For the first time since discovering the loan, I felt a glimmer of hope. Helen was right. James and Vanessa thought they knew me. Predictable, self-sacrificing Margaret who would rather suffer than cause a scene. They had no idea what I was capable of when protecting what was mine. That afternoon, I made 2 calls. The first was to the bank that had approved the fraudulent loan. The second was to Susan Chen, a lawyer Helen had recommended who specialized in elder financial abuse. "We'll take this step by step, Mrs. Harrington," Susan assured me. "First, we document everything. Then we secure your remaining assets. Then we confront." "Not yet," I said. "I need to understand exactly what they've done first. I need to know how deep this goes." Over the next week, I discovered just how thoroughly I'd been betrayed. With Susan's help, I learned that this wasn't the first time they'd used my information. There were credit cards in my name I'd never applied for. Investment accounts I'd never opened had been drained. For nearly 3 years, James and Vanessa had been building their comfortable suburban life using my identity. The house they'd invited me to for obligatory holiday dinners, paid for with my stolen funds, the vacations they took while I worked extra shifts, financed by credit cards bearing my name, the prestigious private schools their children attended, funded by investment accounts opened with my social security number, all while I wore secondhand clothes and calculated whether I could afford to fix my leaking roof. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe when I thought about it. Why didn't I see it? I asked Susan during one of our meetings. How could I be so blind? Susan's eyes were kind but firm. Because they're family, Mrs. Harrington. We trust family. That's what makes this kind of betrayal so devastating and so common. Common. The word struck me. I wasn't alone in this. Other mothers, other grandmothers had sat where I was sitting, discovering the same painful truth. Sometimes those who should love us most are capable of the greatest harm. That night, as I prepared for another sleepless vigil, my phone rang. It was James. "Mom," he said, his voice casual, as if we'd spoken yesterday instead of weeks ago. "Just checking to see if you're coming to dinner on Sunday. Vanessa said she talked to you about some family financial planning." Family financial planning. Was that what they were calling theft now? "I'll be there," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I've been thinking a lot about family lately." "Great," he replied, and I could hear the relief in his voice. He thought I was acquiescing, falling in line as I always had. "Oh, and James," I added, "tell Vanessa I have my answer about the money." After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time in decades, I felt powerful. They thought Sunday's dinner would end with me handing over what remained of my security. They had no idea what was coming. I spent the next 3 days preparing. Not in the way James and Vanessa expected, gathering documents to sign over my remaining assets, but in a different way entirely. First, I made copies of everything. The fraudulent loan documents, the credit card statements I'd never seen, the withdrawal slips from accounts I'd never opened. Susan helped me organize it all chronologically, building a clear timeline of theft that stretched back years. "This is methodical," she observed, flipping through the folder. "Calculated. They've been very careful." "Not careful enough," I said, a new hardness in my voice. Next, I documented my own finances, my modest pension, my remaining savings, the equity in my home. Susan connected me with a financial advisor specializing in senior assets who helped me understand exactly what I had left and what I stood to lose. "They've taken approximately $1.2 million from you over the past 3 years, the advisor explained gently. "That's including the recent loan. If you don't act, they'll take the rest." The number stunned me. $1.2 million. Money. That should have secured my future. Gone to fund their lifestyle of luxury cars and private schools and European vacations. "What options do I have?" I asked. "Several," Susan replied. "We can report the fraud to the police. We can file civil charges. Or," she hesitated, "we can attempt to resolve this privately, with certain legal safeguards in place." I knew immediately which path I would choose. Despite everything, I couldn't bear the thought of James in handcuffs, of my grandchildren watching, their parents being arrested. The public humiliation would destroy them, and in some ways it would destroy me too. "Privately," I said firmly, "but I want everything protected." Susan nodded. "Then we need to act quickly. Before Sunday's dinner." By Friday, I had opened new accounts at a different bank. By Saturday morning, I had transferred my remaining funds. By Saturday afternoon, I had signed papers creating an irrevocable trust that would protect my home and pension from future theft. A trust that named my grandchildren as beneficiaries, bypassing their parents entirely. "They can't touch this." "Now," Susan assured me, "no matter what they try." I also signed a durable power of attorney, not for James, as he'd been pressuring me to do, but for Helen, my neighbor and friend. If anything happened to me, she would make financial and medical decisions according to my wishes, not theirs. The final step was the hardest. With Susan present as a witness, I recorded everything I knew about the fraud, every detail of how my son and daughter-in-law had systematically stolen my identity and my future. The recording would remain sealed unless they refused to make things right. "This is your insurance policy," Susan explained. "Your leverage." Saturday night, I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about how different tomorrow's dinner would be from what James and Vanessa expected. They thought I was coming to surrender. Instead, I was coming to set terms. Part of me grieved for what would be lost. Not the money, that was already gone, but the illusion that my son loved me, that the family I'd sacrificed everything for valued me as more than a resource to be drained. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a blue dress I'd bought years ago for Richard's funeral. I applied makeup with a steady hand. I styled my silver hair neatly. When I looked in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Gone was the tired, defeated woman of recent weeks. In her place stood someone stronger, clearer, determined. I packed the documents Susan had prepared into my handbag. Then I made one final call. Everything's ready, Susan confirmed. Remember, stay calm. Don't let them derail you. Stick to the facts. I will, I promised. And Margaret, remember you're not just doing this for yourself. You're doing it for every parent who's been taken advantage of by their children. You're showing them it's possible to stand up for yourself with dignity. Her words steadied me. This wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about justice. Quiet, private justice, but justice nonetheless. The drive to James and Vanessa's suburban home took 40 minutes. Their house stood on a corner lot in an expensive neighborhood, a 4-bedroom colonial with perfect landscaping and a 3-car garage. As I pulled into their driveway, I noticed James's new SUV parked beside Vanessa's luxury sedan. My money had paid for both. I sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. For a second, I considered driving away, forgetting everything. I'd learned, pretending none of it had happened, but that would only postpone the inevitable. They would take everything down to the last penny. And when there was nothing left, they would discard me like something used up and worthless. No, I hadn't raised my son to be this person. I hadn't sacrificed my life so that he could steal mine. I stepped out of the car, straightened my dress, and walked to the front door with my head held high. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Vanessa stood there in a designer dress, her smile brittle. Margaret, right on time. Hello, Vanessa, I said, my voice calm. How nice to see you, she kissed the air beside my cheek, then led me into their gleaming kitchen, where James was opening a bottle of wine. Mom, he said, barely glancing up. Glad you could make it. My heart ached at the casual dismissal in his voice. When had my presence become such an obligation to him? James, I replied evenly. We need to talk. He finally looked at me, really, looked at me, and something in my expression made him pause. About what? About the loan you and Vanessa took out in my name, I said, watching his face carefully. About the credit cards, the investment accounts, and everything else you've stolen from me over the past 3 years. The wine bottle slipped from his hand, crashing to the floor in a spray of red liquid and broken glass. Vanessa's smile vanished. The perfect facade cracked wide open, and I knew in that moment that everything Susan had discovered was true. Every terrible, heartbreaking detail. I don't know what you're talking about, James stammered, but his eyes gave him away. I opened my handbag and removed the folder of evidence. I think you do, I said. And now we're going to discuss what happens next. The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Wine pooled around the broken glass at James's feet, but no one moved to clean it up. Vanessa had frozen in place, her perfectly manicured hand clutching the edge of the granite countertop. I don't know what you think you found, James finally said, his voice strained. But there's obviously been some misunderstanding. I opened the folder and placed the loan documents on the counter between us, keeping my hand steady despite the way my heart hammered against my ribs. No misunderstanding. James, this is a loan for $1 million taken out in my name, with my forged signature. The funds were transferred to your joint account 3 weeks ago. Vanessa found her voice then, her tone shifting from shock to defensive indignation. We were going to tell you about that. It's a bridge loan, just until our investments mature. We're helping you manage your finances because, frankly, at your age, I'm not finished, I said quietly, cutting her off. I placed another document on the counter. This is a credit card opened in my name 2 years ago. It's currently maxed out at $50,000. I never applied for it. I never used it. James stepped forward, his face flushing. Mom, you don't understand? How expensive everything is these days. The kids' schools, the mortgage. I laid down another paper. This is an investment account, also in my name, emptied last year. $175,000. Gone. One by one, I placed the evidence on the counter between us. Credit card statements, loan documents, withdrawal slips, building a paper trail of betrayal that stretched back years. With each document, James and Vanessa's defenses weakened. Their excuses grew thinner, their faces paler. How did you find out? James finally asked, not meeting my eyes. Does it matter? I replied. The truth would have come out eventually, when the loan payments came due, when there was nothing left to take. Vanessa's composure cracked first. It was her idea, she said suddenly, pointing at me. She offered to help with the kids' education. She wanted to contribute. I stared at her in disbelief. By forging my signature? By opening accounts I knew nothing about? You wouldn't have understood the financial arrangements, she insisted, her voice rising. We were managing things for you. Managing things? I repeated. You've stolen over $1 million from me. You've committed fraud. You've left me with almost nothing for my own care. James looked ill now, sweat beading on his forehead. No one was supposed to get hurt, he mumbled. I felt a sudden flash of anger so intense it nearly took my breath away. No one was supposed to get hurt, I repeated. What did you think would happen, James? Did you think the money would magically reappear? Or did you just not care what happened to me after you'd taken everything? He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Vanessa recovered quickly, shifting tactics. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice suddenly sweet, reasonable. Turn in your own son? Send him to prison? Think about what that would do to the children. There it was, the manipulation I'd expected, the emotional blackmail, the implication that I was the one doing something wrong by holding them accountable. I've already decided what I'm going to do, I said, reaching into my bag for the final folder, the one containing the documents Susan had prepared. I'm giving you a choice. James frowned. What kind of choice? Option 1. You take full responsibility for the fraudulent loan. You make all the payments. You close all accounts opened in my name. You return as much of the stolen money as you can. You sign legal agreements promising never to use my identity again. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. And option 2? I press charges. I give these documents to the police. I testify against you in court. I make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. You wouldn't, James said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. You're bluffing. I met his gaze steadily. Do you really want to test that theory? After everything you've put me through, do you really think I have anything left to lose? For the first time since I'd arrived, real fear showed in his eyes. He understood now that I wasn't the same woman who had sacrificed everything for family harmony. I'd changed, or perhaps I'd simply revealed a strength that had been there all along, buried beneath years of compromise and self-denial. You can't prove we did anything wrong, Vanessa declared, but her voice lacked conviction. Actually, I can, I replied calmly. You weren't as careful as you thought. The bank has surveillance footage of you depositing checks from my accounts into yours. There are witness statements from bank employees who remember you claiming to be acting on my behalf. There's the money itself, traced directly to your accounts. James sank heavily onto a bar stool. Mom, please. We'll lose everything if this gets out. My job, our reputation. I know exactly what it feels like to lose everything, James. My voice broke slightly, despite my best efforts. I've spent the last 3 weeks learning what it's like to discover that my own child sees me as nothing but a resource to be used up and discarded. That's not true, he protested weakly. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you visited without wanting something from me? When was the last time you acted like a son instead of a predator? His face crumpled at my words, and for a moment I glimpsed the boy he had once been, the child I had raised, loved, protected. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man who had chosen greed over love, convenience over conscience. What's in those papers? Vanessa asked suspiciously, nodding at the folder in my hands. Legal agreements, I explained. If you choose option 1, you'll sign these today. They acknowledge the fraud without requiring public disclosure. They commit you to repaying the loan and returning as much of the stolen money as possible. They protect what little I have left. And if we don't sign? James asked. I met his gaze. Directly. Then I walk out that door and drive straight to the police station. Vanessa made a small, distressed sound. James stared at the documents, his face ashen. You have 10 minutes to decide, I said, glancing at my watch. I'll wait in the living room. I walked out of the kitchen, my legs somehow supporting me despite feeling like they might give way at any moment. I sat on their expensive sofa, paid for with my money, and waited, my back straight, my resolve unwavering. Through the doorway, I could see them huddled together, whispering frantically. Vanessa gesturing angrily, James shaking his head. Their perfect world was crumbling around them, and they were desperate to hold the pieces together. Part of me ached for them, for the future they would lose, for the price they would pay. But a larger part recognized that they had brought this on themselves. They had made choices, knowing those choices would harm me. They had prioritized their comfort over my survival. My phone buzzed quietly in my purse. A text from Susan. Everything? Okay? I typed back. Confrontation in progress. Stand by. As I waited for their decision, I looked around their beautiful home. The gleaming hardwood floors, the designer furniture, the expensive art on the walls. All of it purchased with stolen money. All of it built on betrayal. The 10 minutes passed. James appeared in the doorway, Vanessa slightly behind him. His face was gray with defeat, her eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "We'll sign the papers," he said flatly. "We don't have a choice." I nodded, unsurprised. "No, you don't. Not anymore." As I took out a pen and laid the documents on their coffee table, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what had been lost. Not just the money, which could eventually be repaid, but the trust, the love, the bond between mother and child. Those could never be fully restored. "There's one more thing," I said as they prepared to sign. "After today, our relationship changes. I won't be available whenever you need something. I won't be your safety net or your contingency plan. From now on, if you want me in your lives, it will be because you value me as a person, not as a resource." James looked up, his expression unreadable. "And if we don't?" The question hurt more than I wanted to admit. Even now, after everything, he was calculating, evaluating whether keeping me in their lives was worth the effort if there was nothing more to gain. "Then that's your choice," I said softly. "But it's the last one you'll make for me." The next morning, I woke before dawn. For the first time in weeks, I'd slept deeply, without the grinding anxiety that had become my constant companion. I made coffee and carried it to the back porch, watching as the first tentative light crept across my small garden. Yesterday, James and Vanessa had signed every document Susan prepared. The agreements were now filed with the court as a sealed record, evidence that could be made public if they failed to honor their commitments. Under the terms we'd negotiated, they would make all payments on the fraudulent loan. They would close every account opened in my name. They would return $250,000 immediately, money they'd been saving for a vacation home, and pay back the rest in monthly installments. Their lives would be constrained for years to come. No more luxury cars or European vacations. No more designer clothes or country club memberships. The children would transfer from their private schools to public ones. The house would eventually be sold for something more modest. They had left my home in shame yesterday, Vanessa barely containing her fury, James looking hollowed out. I hadn't heard from them since. I didn't expect to for some time. The silence should have bothered me. Instead, it felt like freedom. My phone rang as I was rinsing my coffee cup. It was Helen. "How are you?" she asked, her voice warm with concern. "Better than I expected," I admitted. Sad, but lighter somehow. "You did the right thing, Margaret. They gave you no choice." "I know," I sighed, "but knowing doesn't make it easier." Later that morning, I met with Susan at her office to finalize the changes to my financial arrangements. The trust protecting my home and remaining assets was officially registered. My new accounts were secure, with alerts that would notify both Susan and me of any unusual activity. "What about the emotional fallout?" Susan asked gently as we finished the paperwork. "Have you thought about talking to someone professionally?" I hadn't, but the suggestion made sense. The betrayal had left wounds that legal documents couldn't heal. "I'll consider it," I promised. On the drive home, I took a detour past the senior center where I'd occasionally volunteered before Richard's illness consumed all my time. On impulse, I pulled into the parking lot and went inside. Carol, the coordinator, greeted me with surprise and delight. "Margaret, it's been years. How are you?" "I'm recalibrating," I said honestly. "And I find myself with time on my hands." "Do you still need volunteers?" She laughed. "Always. Come, let me show you what we're doing these days." As she led me through the center, introducing me to staff and residents, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Purpose, connection, the possibility of a life defined by more than caregiving and sacrifice. "We have an art therapy program on Tuesdays," Carol explained, showing me a sunny room filled with easels, "and a memoir writing workshop on Thursdays. Many of our residents are documenting their life stories for their families. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here were seniors creating legacies of wisdom and experience for descendants who might actually value them. I'd like to help with both, I decided. I used to paint years ago, and everyone has a story worth telling, including me. By the time I left the center, I'd committed to volunteering twice a week and signed up for a painting class. Small steps toward reclaiming not just my financial security, but my identity, the parts of myself I'd set aside for so long. The following week brought an unexpected development. My granddaughter Emma, James's 16-year-old, showed up on my doorstep after school. "Grandma," she said, shifting awkwardly on my porch. "Can I come in?" I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside. "Of course." She followed me to the kitchen, her backpack clutched against her chest like a shield. I offered her cookies and milk, an old habit from when she was little and visited more often. "Mom and Dad are fighting all the time," she blurted out suddenly. "Dad sleeps in the guest room. Mom keeps crying and yelling about how everything's ruined." I sat across from her, uncertain what to say. How much did she know? How much should she know? "They said we have to change schools," Emma continued, her voice small. "And Mom's selling her jewelry. Dad just sits in his office staring at nothing. They won't tell us what happened, but I heard them talking about loans and fraud," and she looked up, her eyes suddenly penetrating. "And your name. Did something happen between you and my parents, Grandma?" The question hung between us. I'd never lied to my grandchildren and wasn't about to start now, but the full truth would shatter their image of their parents, and possibly their sense of security. "Your parents and I had a serious disagreement about money," I said carefully. "They made some choices that hurt me very badly. We're working through it, but it's going to take time." Emma nodded slowly, a wisdom beyond her years in her expression. "They took something from you, didn't they?" I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "What matters now is that they're making it right. And none of this is your fault, Emma. None of it reflects on you." Tears welled in her eyes. "But everything's changing. Nothing feels safe anymore." I recognized the look, the same bewildered hurt I'd seen in James's eyes when he was a child and his father's illness had upended our lives. History was repeating itself in the worst way. "Change isn't always bad," I said gently. "And some things never change. Like how much I love you. That's permanent, no matter what happens between me and your parents." Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Can I still come see you?" "Mom said we shouldn't bother you, but—" "You can always come here," I said firmly. "This is still your grandmother's house, and you're always welcome." After Emma left, I sat alone in my kitchen, turning our conversation over in my mind. James and Vanessa were shielding themselves from the consequences of their actions by isolating their children from me. By painting me as the villain in their story, I picked up my phone and after a moment's hesitation, called James. "Mom," he answered, his voice wary. "What do you want?" "To talk about your children," I said calmly. "Emma came to see me today." Sharp intake of breath. "She shouldn't have done that without permission." "Permission?" I repeated. "Since when do children need permission to visit their grandmother?" "Since things changed," he muttered. "The only thing that's changed," I said, keeping my voice level, "is that I'm no longer allowing you and Vanessa to steal from me. That has nothing to do with my relationship with my grandchildren." Silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed. "What do you want, Mom?" "I want to remain part of their lives. I want them to understand that whatever happens between us, my love for them is unconditional." I paused. Unlike some people, I don't withdraw my love when I can no longer profit from a relationship. The barb hit home. I heard his sharp intake of breath. "That's not fair," he protested weakly. "No," I agreed. "None of this is fair. But we deal with reality as it is, not as we wish it were. And the reality is that your children need stability right now. They need to know that some relationships can be trusted." Another long silence. Then grudgingly, "Fine, they can visit you." "Thank you." I kept my voice neutral, refusing to show either gratitude or triumph. This wasn't a favor he was granting me. It was a basic human decency he was finally acknowledging. After we hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, reflecting on how much had changed in just 2 weeks. I had gone from victim to advocate, from passive to assertive, from powerless to empowered. The losses were real and painful. My relationship with my son would never be the same. The easy comfort of family holidays, the simple trust that blood meant loyalty, those were gone forever. But there were gains, too. Self-respect, boundaries, a clearer vision of who I was beyond my roles as mother, caregiver, financial resource. For decades, I had defined myself through service to others, first to Richard, then to James. I had measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could endure. No more. Susan called later that afternoon with news. The bank had formally acknowledged the fraud and removed the loan from my credit report. James and Vanessa had made the first repayment as agreed. The legal mechanisms were working as designed. You should be proud of yourself, Margaret, Susan said. Many people in your situation never find the courage to confront their abusers. Abusers. The word jolted me. I hadn't thought of James and Vanessa that way, but Susan was right. Financial exploitation was abuse, especially when perpetrated by family members against an older relative. I don't feel proud, I admitted. I feel resolute, like I've finally acknowledged my own worth. That's even better, Susan replied. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old watercolor set, set up an easel by the window, and began to paint. Not Richard, not James, not the family I'd lost, but the garden outside, bursting with spring growth, new life emerging from soil long dormant. As I worked, letting the colors flow and blend, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Not resignation, not martyrdom, hope. The painting wasn't particularly good. My skills were rusty from disuse, but it was mine. Created by my hand, expressing my vision, serving no purpose beyond my own satisfaction. When the doorbell rang, I was so absorbed in my work that I startled, accidentally dragging a streak of blue across the canvas. I opened the door to find Helen, standing there, a bottle of wine in one hand and a bag from the local bakery in the other. I thought you might need company, she said simply. I looked at her, this neighbor who had become my advocate and friend, and felt tears sting my eyes. I would love some. We sat on my porch as twilight deepened, sharing wine and pastries and conversation. Helen didn't ask about James or Vanessa or the legal proceedings. Instead, she told me about the community garden she was helping to establish, about the book club she thought I might enjoy, about the senior travel group planning a trip to the coast in October. You should come with us, she suggested. The ocean is magnificent in the fall. The ocean. How long had it been since I'd seen it? Years, decades, perhaps. Richard and I had honeymooned by the sea, but after his diagnosis, travel had become too complicated, too stressful. I'd like that, I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As we sat in comfortable silence, watching the first stars appear, I thought about the long path ahead. The legal arrangements would continue. James and Vanessa would make payments. For years. My relationship with them would evolve in ways I couldn't yet predict. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't living for someone else's needs. I wasn't defining myself through sacrifice. I wasn't measuring my worth by how much I could endure. I was simply Margaret, older and wiser, wounded but healing, finally reclaiming the life that had always been mine to live. 6 months passed. Autumn arrived, painting the trees around my house in reds and golds. Like those trees, I too had transformed. The legal agreements with James and Vanessa held firm. Each month, payments arrived on time, cold, transactional, with no accompanying notes. Our personal relationship remained fractured. James called occasionally, voice stiff with formality. Vanessa never contacted me. Emma mentioned they had sold their luxury cars and were downsizing their lifestyle, as Vanessa bitterly put it. I took no pleasure in their discomfort. Their choices had led to consequences, nothing more. My own life had blossomed. Volunteer. Work at the senior center expanded to 4 days weekly. I discovered a talent for helping residents record their life stories. Everyone deserves to have their story preserved, I told a new resident. Not because it's extraordinary, but because it's yours. Painting classes unlocked something long dormant in me. You have a distinctive style, my instructor noted. A quietness, but also strength, like still waters that run deep. The description pleased me. Quiet strength, exactly what I had been cultivating. Helen and I joined the book club, then the travel group. In October, we spent a week at a coastal inn. I'd forgotten how vast the ocean is, I said as we watched the sunset. How it makes everything else seem small. Helen nodded. Problems included. Standing before that endless horizon, the betrayal that had consumed my thoughts seemed smaller, more manageable. Not forgotten, never that, but contained. The grandchildren visited regularly. Emma came most often. They arrived wary at first, but soon were coming for themselves, for cookie baking lessons, homework help, quiet conversations about their changing family. During one of Emma's November visits, she delivered the news I'd been both expecting and dreading. "Dad wants to come. For Thanksgiving," she said as we kneaded dough. "He asked if that would be okay." My hands stilled. "Just your father? Not your mother?" Emma shook her head. "Mom says she'll never step foot in this house again. She says you've ruined everything." I sighed, unsurprised. "What do you think?" I asked gently. "I think Dad did something really bad to you, and Mom probably made him do it, or knew about it. Now they're both mad because they got caught, not because they're sorry." Her perception startled me. "That's remarkably accurate," I admitted. She shrugged. "I'm not a little kid anymore, Grandma. I see things. Your father can come for Thanksgiving, but there need to be ground rules." Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and cold. At noon, James arrived, a bakery box in hand. He'd lost weight with new gray at his temples. His confident air was gone, replaced by something subdued. "Mom," he said uncertainly, "thank you for having me." The early hours were awkward. James was subdued, the children watchful. We moved through the holiday like actors in a play. After dinner, when the children left to watch a movie, James and I had a moment alone. "I want to thank you," he said as he dried a dish I'd washed. "For dinner?" "For not pressing charges. You could have ruined us completely." I continued washing. "I didn't want to destroy you. I just needed to protect myself. I've been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why you stole from your own mother," I supplied quietly. He flinched but nodded. "It started small. A credit card here, a loan there. I told myself you'd want to help if I asked, but it got easier. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as a resource." His admission hit hard. That must have been convenient, to stop seeing me as a person with needs. "I know what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I understand now, and I'm sorry." I looked at him directly. The son I'd raised, the man who had betrayed me. His eyes held what looked like genuine remorse, but I had been fooled before. "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "But trust, once broken, isn't easily repaired. I need more than words." He nodded. "I know. The repayments will continue, and I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship, if you're willing. Not as it was, but something healthier." The old Margaret would have rushed to reassure him. But I wasn't that woman anymore. "I'm not sure what that would look like," I said, honestly. "But for the children's sake, I'm willing to take small steps." Relief flickered across his face. "That's all I'm asking for. A chance." Later, in my quiet house, I reflected. The conversation with James had been neither a full reconciliation nor a final break, just a tentative first step toward something undefined. The phone rang. "Helen, how did it go?" "Better than expected. Worse than hoped for," I replied. "Are you okay?" I considered. The betrayal still hurt. The relationship with my son remained fragile. The future held no guarantees. Yet I had survived. More than survived. I had reclaimed my life, my agency, my sense of self. I had drawn boundaries and enforced them. I had faced the hardest truth a mother can face, that her child is capable of deliberate harm, and found the strength to hold him accountable without hating him. "Yes," I said finally, "I'm okay, not because everything is fixed, but because I know now that I can handle whatever comes next." After hanging up, I watched the stars emerge. In their ancient patterns, I found comfort. They had witnessed countless human dramas, betrayals and reconciliations, losses and recoveries. Mine was just one small story. Yet it was my story, uniquely. Mine, with all its pain and resilience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The relationship with James would require careful navigation. Vanessa's resentment might never fade. The legal arrangements would need vigilance. But tonight, I felt unexpected. Peace. Not the peace of perfect resolution, but the deeper peace of knowing your own strength, your own worth, your capacity to meet life on its terms. The betrayal had shown me the worst in those I loved, but in responding to it, I had discovered the best in myself, and that was enough.